Hi, it's Sarah from sarahmakesart.com. My friend Sherry was reading my mind and she asked me on Facebook how I make my art because it looks like wire art. And it's very similar. It's the same kind of idea, using lines and things to create sculptures or flat objects. But I use plastic and I use a 3D printing pen. And so just when I thought about making a video, she popped up on Facebook and asked the question. So here we go. This, to start with, is my 3D printing pen. This is a Minted brand pen. I say minted, it's Mint 3D. There are lots of different types of pens out on the market. This one I chose because I can buy big spools. Let me grab one for you. Big spools of filament like this. This is glow-in-the-dark filament. Hopefully I'll do something fun with that later. But I can buy big spools instead of like some products, they just have sticks that you can buy. But because my projects are usually larger, I needed, an opportunity to not keep feeding it into the back of the pen. So, and this is, we'll just work with the black. This is black printing filament. It's PLA plastic. So, So it is the same filament that they use in 3D printers, but this one I can use it in the pen. So what this does is this is heated up to 190 degrees Celsius, which is about 374 degrees Fahrenheit. And just this end heats up right here. So it gets pretty toasty, but it's so small it's not a problem. It won't, burn you unless you really just grab onto it. And what I do is I feed the filament into the back of the pen. And it has little gears inside that pull it down. And as it gets warmer, it heats up in the end. You can hear the motor going. And it takes a little bit to get down in there. Different filaments might use different temperatures, but this is a Solutech brand, and I really like it. It's really consistent filament. So, they also have another kind, but PLA is really nice filament. It's corn-based, so it's not as bad for the environment. All right, so now you can see if I press forward, you may have already seen that, my filament gets extruded out. And as it comes out, it's pretty hot, but it cools off really quickly. So it's really just a thin piece of plastic, and it's even, until it cools off, it's even sort of stretchable and flexible, but the more it cools, the more rigid it becomes. So I'm gonna swing this camera around and put it down, and we'll make a feather for the phoenix I've been working on. What I do is I start with a workspace that's covered in brown craft paper. We found this paper in the painting section at Walmart, but they do have some in the, craft aisle that's a lot wider. But this works really well. If I need to make a larger surface, I just tape some, layers together. But this helps the plastic when it melts. It helps it have something to grip onto, because if you don't have something and it's just on a slick surface, it will lump up, and that becomes a big problem, especially when you're trying to build up layers. But we're going to make a feather, just a small feather for the phoenix. Probably something, let me see, I have one over here. Something like this. This is just a filler feather. I use it to fill in gaps that look like they don't have enough detail or need something to help continue the flow, so visually it looks balanced. And they work out pretty simply, and really the process is fairly simple. So to get my pen up to temp, I press forward, and the digital display counts up for me, and it actually heats up fairly quickly. You can adjust this to anything you want with their plus and minus buttons, and it goes up pretty high. But for this, 190 is working really well for me right now. And we're up to temp already. So basically, if you can draw, you can do basic printing like this. So the motor is extruding the plastic out. I have my pen on full speed since I've been working with it a while, it's very comfortable for me. And I have to be careful though to not move my hand quicker than it's extruding, because it can pull the plastic and make it very thin. And if I don't move my hand quick enough, it will glob up and you just have blobs of plastic. So that's my first layer. See, it's sticking down to the paper really well. You can't move it unless you peel it off. I'm going to add another part to it. The joints connect really well. When I come up to a piece that I've already done, I always try to make sure my pen pushes against it to kind of seal the ends together. Let's do one more over here. Same thing when I'm starting it, I kind of push up that line. Now this dries, I shouldn't say dries, but it cools off very quickly. I can already touch it, it's not going to do anything to me. And if your environment's cooler, depends on the temperature you keep your house or your workshop, depends on how quickly it cools off. Which can be either a benefit or a deficit, because if it cools off too quickly and you had plans to sort of bend it or shape it a little bit more, then that can cause a problem. But for this, it's perfectly fine. So I don't actually have to wait for this to cool off before I go over it again, but I do on the beginning, because if I don't go over this a second time, at least a second time, then it becomes too thin and it won't support its weight. I have one here, it's a little tangled up. So this has just been done once, and it's very thin. It's very flexible and bouncy, but it's too weak for what I need, because I'm going to put a lot of weight on it. So I'm going to go over it a second time. And when I go over it, it will remelt the bottom layer just a little bit, which works when I'm trying to shape it. Like if I need to make it have a nice bend, I'll do it over a form that's round. But this is also where the brown paper comes in handy, because if it remelts and it's not stuck down to a surface, it'll lump up and want to warp on you. There we go. When I did the peacock sculpture, I actually kept going over certain areas, especially on the tail, and I built up a nice wall. And that was really interesting, because then when I added my details to it, I could have some parts higher and some parts lower. It was just a really nice 3D effect that helped make the peacock pop a little. Okay, it's already cool. It's just fine. That'll work pretty well. This one, let me get it here. This one's been gone over twice, and you can see that it's going to be a lot harder. So the larger areas still have a lot of flexibility because I don't have detail in it on this one yet, but it's not as springy. It holds its form a lot better. But to keep it holding its form and to add interest to the sculpture, we're going to add some inside detail to here. So we'll draw a couple more lines. We can go straight back over them. There's really no need to stop. Stopping frequently helps sometimes though, because if you're not used to doing it, you might have to move your hand position or your arm position, or else you'll get in a really awkward spot. And if I ever mess up, it's really not a big deal, because I can just take my scissors and cut off the piece that I, that didn't work. Like if I run out of filament in the middle, or my pen slips, or it's just not connected how I want. And I can cut it off at the joints and then redraw it, and it looks pretty good. It doesn't create too much of a problem. So we're going to fill in these new sections with some zigzags. And sometimes I use different kinds of zigzag lines. For here, I'll just do a simple one. So as I touch each of these long pieces, the plastic is melting together. But you have to be careful, because when these pieces are very close together, you have to move your pen quickly. And when they're very far apart, you have to move more slowly, so it has time to extrude. But I actually have an issue sometimes on my really big feathers. When I get to really wide pieces, I tend to pull too quickly when I hit the joint, and it stretches the plastic out very thin. But it's really not that bad, because PLA plastic is really versatile and it's really strong. So I have some that are like sewing thread thin or less, and it's still amazing how supportive it is. And that way it actually helps it visually, because there's a different line weight, and so it just adds more interest. So I'm gonna fill these in for you. All right, one more spot. What's great about the 3D pens, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, is that when your filament runs out in the back, it's actually so high up in the pen that when you put a new piece in, it doesn't create a gap in the pen. So your new piece just melts right into your old piece and makes a continuous thread of filament. To finish this off, I'm going to do some zigzag lines on these edges. It just makes it look much nicer, adds detail and interest, and it's just a nice clean way to finish everything off, so it doesn't look very jagged. Covers your joints very nicely. On my bicycle piece that I did the same technique, the zigzags on the edges, but I did them really close together so they were touching, and that's how I made the tires on it. And I was so happy with that, because I really like all the little tiny details that probably nobody pays attention to. Okay, when I go around a large piece like that, and I've been doing it for a while, I do like to give my pen just a little break. I don't want to over stress it or anything like that. But it doesn't take very long, just a few seconds. Okay, almost there. What this also does is gives me a wider surface to work with when I attach the feather to the sculpture. Just having the single or the double strand to create the outline is nice, but when you go to attach it, it doesn't give you very much space. So when you attach it, it looks like a glob of plastic. But this helps me out because it gives a wider spot. Because when I join it, I have to melt some plastic onto it and then stick it together before it dries, or before it cools. I keep saying dries. Okay, one more part and I'll peel it up. You can see how that works. There we go. Now some of my feathers are very, very large and they can take up to 20, 30, 40 minutes to make. But these small ones are nice and quick and simple. So this brown paper is great. I've used other papers underneath it with not so great results. And when you peel it up, the paper wants to stick to the bottom because the plastic's melted onto it. But this has a smoother texture to it, and it usually just peels up very nicely. And be sure not to strain any of your joints. Take the edges off first and follow it around, and it pops right off. So there you have it. These inside areas support it really, really well. And the weight of the sculpture, it's not going to pull it too badly. Up here gives me a nice place to connect it to. And that's how you make a feather, nice and easy.